Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
When it comes to UFOs, what did U.S. presidents know and when did they know it? Are some presidents kept in the dark on the subject? Who or what decides?
Greetings from the 2020 Western Connecticut UFO Conference emanating from Danbury, Connecticut Public Library, and welcome to the 866th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you live from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, and on TuneIn.com. Also catch the show at owenworldwide.com, where you can see the video stream as well as YouTube. I'm Ben, and those questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and my father, Paul.
Well, here we are. Today we're having a little trouble getting him on the line here, but we will shortly. We welcome back a legend in the UFO community, and those participating in the UFO conference should be able to talk to him during the panel discussion at 1:15 Eastern Time today after we're off the air. If you have questions during the show, call Actually, I'm going to ask you to not call that line. Well, yeah, we will. 401-766-1240. From anywhere, or email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com. Coming to us via Skype today, or phone, we will see which, is none other than Dr. William J. Birnes, more commonly known as Bill Birnes. Bill is a New York Times best-selling author, publisher of UFO magazine. 6. Yeah. And a New York literary agent who has written and edited over 25 books and encyclopedias in the fields of human behavior, true crime, current affairs, history, psychology, business, computing, and the paranormal. Real Renaissance man, Bill is. Bill received his Ph.D. from New York University in 1974. Bill is well known as the star of the UFO Hunters series on the History Channel, which aired for 3 seasons beginning in 2008. He has been an occasional guest co-host on our show for many years. The book we'll discuss today is UFOs and the White House. What did our presidents know and when did they know it? That's by Bill and his co-author, Joel Martin. So we're doing technological negotiations here with the universe to get Bill on. We have him on the phone. We're going to try to get him on Skype so you can see him on the video. And we will take it away, certainly. But we've had a long history with Bill. He was first on. Do we have him on?
He's on I'm here. Telephone, but
they can't hear me.
Okay.
The thing is that he's called the Danbury Library electronically, and so he couldn't also be connected to us. Instead of connecting to us and letting the Danbury Library get it from us.
Okay, well, all right.
He did a home run there, so now he's on telephone.
Okay, fine. So, that was Dave Richards, a samurai among station managers who was just soldiered with us through these technical difficulties here.
I'm very proud of the alliteration you did there, Father. That was very good.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at that. That's why I'm a writer, Ben. But anyway, we would tell folks that they can pick up the show today on the Danbury Library Facebook page. It's live streaming there, and this is the first time we've done such a simulcast. So, Ben.
So, Bill Birnes, after quite a harrowing morning, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Oh, because actually what happened, guys, is that the forces of the paranormal did not want any truths revealed. So therefore, they sent a stream of electrons into all of my devices, blocking me from getting on until I realized that on this iPhone with this new system, somebody actually locked Tim Cook up, because this system is so bad that it makes the phones do things no humans can do, which is scary if you're a human.
It is. Well, here we all are, and that's what matters. And you're lucky you don't co-host here every week, Bill, because we have a lot of interesting things happen. So, Ben, take us away with our questions.
Well, I suppose, we must start at the very, very beginning, as Julie Andrews once said. In your book, you trace presidential UFO sightings all the way back to George Washington at Valley Forge. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. what's even more fascinating than George Washington, which is a great story, which we'll talk about, is that UFOs in the New World were apparent to the indigenous peoples in what became the United States and what became Canada and Mexico. So these are UFOs over North America. But actually, some of the very, very first sightings of UFOs in colonial America were made by none other than the minister, Cotton Mather, one of the most famous religious writers in New England, who, with his telescope, was looking at the moon and wrote, and this is in the NASA report on lunar anomalies, he wrote that he saw strange lights circling over the moon. And I'm telling you, I saw a video the other day, a recent video of strange lights circling over the moon, and I'm saying, my God, for over 400 years, this guy has been, we've been looking at the moon and seeing strange lights. George Washington's vision at Valley Forge also harks back to George Washington's visions and George Washington's experiences during the French and Indian War 20 years earlier, when he was fighting with, I want to say, General Burgoyne. Could be the wrong general, but when they were fighting here in Pennsylvania, over they were trying to dislodge the French from Fort Duquesne. It was a French fort outside of Pittsburgh. Very, 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 very important fort, because that fort controlled the entrance to the Susquehanna River, which joins with the Allegheny River to form the Ohio River, which flows into the Mississippi, hence the three rivers. So, they were trying to force a crossing across the Susquehanna River. And as they were doing it, the general just forced his army across. The way the Iroquois were fighting and the Delaware were fighting the British, they weren't fighting the British line to line the way European armies in the field. This was a guerrilla warfare. The Native Americans on both sides of the British lined up and just started picking them off, just like the Americans did in Vermont. And so what Boyne did was he said, I'm going to force a crossing. And he forced a crossing across the Susquehanna River, where he was shot mortally wounded by a musket ball. George Washington, seeing this, he was a lieutenant colonel at the time, seeing this, gets a group of men, runs into the river, pulls Burgoyne out of danger, and during that time, he was dead in the sights of one of the local chiefs of the Delaware Nation. And as he aimed his musket right at Washington's head, a spirit came down. And this is in the chief's own words. The chief said that I saw the great spirit Manitou hover over George Washington. And when we were hovering over George Washington, I knew from the great spirit's appearance this was a great man not to be killed by my musket ball. And hence Washington survived that battle. He's at Valley Forge 20 years later, and he's in the woods, and he sees a vision, a green, glowing orb. And he writes that out of that orb, he saw the face of the Indian chief that he saw on the other side of the Susquehanna River aiming a musket at him. But that chief had died the week before. Washington also saw a flying saucer. And in vision, out of that flying saucer, this white creature, dressed in white, who held up for him the battle plan of the Revolutionary War, the whole battle plan, how Washington would defeat the British, then explained that America would go through trials and travails for hundreds of years in the future, but everything would wind up being all right. Washington wrote in his journal, and we published that in UFOs in the White House. Washington wrote in his journal this entire story and how that gave him heart. And he told his entire staff of officers why that gave him heart. And that was the story of Washington at Valley Forge and the first American military UFO sighting.
Wow. Well, we're interested in that, particularly, Bill, because in our own book, Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, we had the story of George Washington and the Angel, which also supposedly took place at Valley Forge. However, we were a bit skeptical because of the sources of this. Apparently, the story didn't appear until after the Civil War in a veterans magazine, and it was not in his journal. But if this was in his journal, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I was actually.
Yeah, it actually was in his journal, and the reason it appeared in that Army magazine, I think it was Stars and Stripes. The reason it appeared in Stars and Stripes is that the last living member, the guy was 100 years old, the last living member of Washington's unit that crossed the Susquehanna wrote that story before he died.
Well, okay, that's pretty interesting stuff. So we have I guess he hadn't come on the scene last time you co-hosted, but we have a very faithful listener in Bogota, Colombia, Bill, who almost every week sends in some very excellent questions, and he has a few for you. So, Ben, if you would. Go ahead.
Sure thing. So Peter starts off with, Dr. Birnes, if he discovered any transcripts of what President Eisenhower actually said during his famous 1952 UFO flap over Washington, D.C., what did they say?
Well, here's what they said. This was a real battle within the United States Air Force. Because, first of all, the orders that the Air Force gave... first of all, Washington was not president in 1952. He won the November election, obviously, which is another great story. He won the November election and didn't take office until 1953. But in 1952, George Washington had two amazing UFO sightings, one of which he actually commented on.
You mean Eisenhower?
Eisenhower, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was Dwight Eisenhower. Before he ran, well, he was running that summer, but that summer he was part of Operation Mainbrace, which was one of NATO's first combined operations using nuclear forces to block the Soviet Union in the event of a Third World War, to block the Soviet Union from entering the North Atlantic. That was Operation Mainbrace. And in Operation Mainbrace, on the Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the first U.S. nuclear-powered anti-aircraft carrier, the USS FDR, who had two UFO experiences. It was in the North Sea, and a USO, a submersible object, an unknown submersible object, broke the surface of the water and flew into the sky. It was obviously shadowing the Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Washington was on the bridge, saw it.
Yeah, Eisenhower.
And Eisenhower was on the bridge.
I don't want to confuse everybody.
He was on the bridge. President Eisenhower General Eisenhower was on the bridge, and he saw the USO break the surface. And he said to each member of the bridge crew, "We all know what we saw, but we're never going to talk about it again." And he went back below decks. That was a quote from one of the bridge crew on the USS FDR when Eisenhower came up on board to come up topside to look at that light that was breaking through the water, that had been following the aircraft carrier all along. So that was Eisenhower's statement about UFOs. Then, in July of 1952, there was this massive UFO incursion over Washington, D.C., and the Air Force gave the order, shoot them down. And the great book on this is by Frank Ficino, who
yeah.
writes the story of those orders and what happened, because that was the reason when we shot one down for the Flatwoods Monster. But Eisenhower saw these UFOs. And sure enough, what was one of his first acts when he became president? One of his first acts. He negotiated us out of the Korean War. Amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first act after his inauguration and seeing the UFOs over Washington, seeing a UFO firsthand over the North Sea, Washington gets us out of the Korean War. Then, you all know the story of Washington's meeting, of Eisenhower's meeting with a delegation of ETs at an Air Force base in Northern California and in New Mexico. And at those meetings, there was a treaty structured. It was an open skies agreement. That was Eisenhower's response to all this UFO incursion. So under this open skies agreement, that UFOs could wander through our skies, observe us, we're not going to shoot them down, we may observe them. They agree that we can observe them without any hostilities. And then we would allow them to inspect us. We would not interfere with them, they would not interfere with us, we would keep it quiet. And then that agreement became part of Eisenhower's open skies agreement with Khrushchev. So this all lines up. So Eisenhower was, and of course we've all seen the MJ-12 Eisenhower briefing notes describing exactly what was going on. And so Eisenhower was really the first president who had to find a way, well, actually he was the second because Harry Truman was the first after Roswell. Eisenhower had to find a way to maintain this cover-up, to use what he found out about UFOs, what they wanted, what the delegation wanted, and then apply that to his own administration's dealing with the Soviet Union.
Good.
Well, I guess the question would be, I just wrote this down, so I'm trying to figure out how to word it as I talk, so bear with me. So let's say, the Open Skies Agreement, right? This whole sort of, okay, well, yeah, we'll stay out of your way, you stay out of ours kind of thing. Does it, I guess as time has gone on and the more research that's been done has shown that there's, different species with different motives and different operations and whatever. Sort of a change in craft that's occurred over time, sort of more ethereal. A lot of stuff's being more spiritualized. In this sort of way, if there was an agreement that was struck, would this apply to all ETs or only certain ETs that we know of?
Look at our own foreign policy. I mean, you can look at our own foreign policy and answer that question yourself, which is that we make separate deals with different countries or different blocks of countries. So, at least for the moment, we have a standing agreement with NATO under Article 5 that all the NATO powers support each other in case any one power is attacked, which was only invoked once, by the way, in the history of NATO since the end of World War II. And that history was, after 9/11, NATO stepped up. Okay, so they've defended us. That was, so we make separate agreements with separate powers or separate blocks of powers. So NATO is one such agreement. The Southeast Asia Treaty Organization is another agreement. So we engage in military agreements historically by forming blocks of powers. So we don't get involved in other people's wars if our interests are not at stake. And that's what it was. Now, we ourselves violated Clause 5 of the NATO agreement all the way back in 1954 when the French Foreign Legion contingent was under siege in North Vietnam at Dien Bien Phu. And there were American Marines, and I spoke to one, American Marines at Dien Bien Phu in 1954 that unit had to fight its way through the jungle while the French Foreign Legion troops were helicoptered out after the French surrendered the base to the Viet Minh. So that was so even then the United States, Eisenhower knew that was an unwinnable war. He kept us out of Vietnam. You may want to ask at some point why Johnson brought us in, but the point is Eisenhower argued he negotiated separate agreements with separate powers, including the aliens.
All right.
Now, which group of aliens, we don't know, whether it's the Greys or the Roundheads or this or that. Assume that it was the most prevalent group visiting this planet, the ones that visited us in July 1952, and that was the basis of the Open Skies Agreement.
Okay. All right. Now, there are two more questions from Peter. However, before that, I'm just very curious about, is it true that some presidents are let in on these things and other presidents are not?
Well, that's another strange story. And it goes something like this. Jimmy Carter had his own UFO sighting. So let's start with that. We know that's a fact because Jimmy Carter filed a sighting report, I think, with NICAP or QFOS, one of those two organizations. So we know that Carter had a sighting. We know that on the campaign, this is, again, we're going all the way back to, 1974. So we know that Carter was asked on the campaign trail, probably by somebody we know, would you tell the truth about UFOs to the American people if you are elected? And he said, yes, I will. Then, after he's elected, the story goes, someone, clearly with Oval Office access, walks into the Oval Office and tells Carter point blank, if you try to explore and reveal the secrets of what we have about UFOs, which means there are secrets we have about UFOs, your presidency will be destroyed. Carter never did. I think at the end of the 90s, I was at a book signing with Jimmy Carter. And I asked him when we were alone, just right to his face. I said, who was it that walked into the Oval Office and told you to shut it down? Don't explore UFOs. I said, was it Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was one of the Jason scholars under President Eisenhower? And the MJ-12 group was administratively, hierarchically under the Jason scholars. So if Zbigniew Brzezinski was a Jason scholar in the Eisenhower administration, and we know from eyewitnesses, that both the Truman and Eisenhower administrations kept alive ET, Coleman EBE, but an extraterrestrial, in custody, and they were testing it from 1948. We know that because we have a sighting in 1948. Then, right through the early 50s when it died, and we have another sighting, and this one by a very, very famous person, whose name I was sworn to keep silent, by NASA. So that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. There was a living ET inside the United States military into the 1950s. So we know that from eyewitnesses. And we also know from what Larry Warren has told us, what Jackie Gleason himself, the comedian Jackie Gleason, the great one, well, he was one of Richard Nixon's best friends. Best friends in the whole world. They were both Florida folks, and so that's what they were. And one night, as we all know, Jackie Gleason told the story that one night there was a black car pulls up to his house in Florida. In the car is Richard Nixon, all alone, no Secret Service. And this is Gleason's story. How did I confirm it? let's get the confirmation first. When Jackie Gleason was making the movie, Nothing in Common, with Tom Hanks at Sony Pictures, he told everybody at the Culver City set of Sony Pictures about the experience he had with Richard Nixon and the alien. One of the people he told was the head of Sony Pictures at the time, Jeff Sagansky, who told me that story. But he also told, if anybody remembers the old Jackie Gleason show, which I doubt anybody does from the 1950s, but if they do, you'll remember those famous shots of the June Taylor dancers, right, making those circles and the upside-down cameras that Busby Berkeley invented, shooting it from the top down. June Taylor, that was the June Taylor dancers in New York, Carnegie Hall at RKO. Her sister, Barbara Taylor, married Jackie Gleason. We spoke to Barbara Taylor, and she said that when Jackie Gleason had come back from Florida, he was a changed human being. Changed when he came back from that one experience with Richard Nixon, seeing the dead alien. And the experience was Nixon picks up Jackie Gleason. They drive to an Air Force base. They are led onto the base. The security guard is shocked to see the President of the United States and Jackie Gleason, one of the biggest television stars in the 1950s. Now, of course, it's the 1970s, and they're driving, and they go to a secured spot on the base. There, in that secured spot, they bring out, Jackie Gleason shows him artifacts. Then he shows him a coffin. And in the coffin is the body of an alien. And Jackie Gleason told his wife, Barbara Taylor, it was one of the most frightening things I ever saw. Now, you may say, why Jackie Gleason? Why Jackie Gleason? You know, why is Reginald Van Gleason III, Ralph Cramden, why do we have these characters seeing a UFO? Jackie Gleason was an absolute firm believer in the paranormal, in the existence of UFOs. His library of paranormal books was incredible, and he was a follower of a lot of paranormal people, and he knew all about the MJ-12 papers. And so supposedly that was the reason that Jackie Gleason, for all of Richard Nixon's term in politics, his terms in politics as vice president and as president, Gleason would ask him, tell me about the UFOs, tell me about the UFOs, tell me about the ETs, where are the aliens? And Gleason said, if you ask me this question again, we will never speak again.
Why don't we hold that thought, because we're going to take our mid-show break. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. Today, simulcasting with the Western Connecticut UFO Conference, and we will be right back with our great guest, Bill Birnes, so stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM. And we're back with Bill Birnes, UFO legend. And Bill, didn't mean to interrupt you there, so if there's anything else to say about dear old Jackie Gleason, you can finish up and we'll go to the next question.
Well, what Barbara Taylor, Jackie's wife, told us was that sighting at that Air Force base with Richard Nixon, so Richard Nixon was in the know the entire time. And the corollary to that, and here's where things get, I mean, as strange as that story is, the stranger part is if you read the book, Stranger at the Pentagon, talking about this creature from Venus, this humanoid from Venus, Valiant Thor. When Val Thor visited from Venus, and why do I think that sounds so much like Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land? But when he visited from Venus, Eisenhower put Richard Nixon in charge, and he was staying at the Pentagon. And so, strange how these two stories correlate. Actually, three stories correlate. Eisenhower structuring a deal with aliens at Muroc. The Richard Nixon story of Valiant Thor, and then Richard Nixon taking Jackie Gleason to actually see the body of a dead alien at Homestead Air Force Base in Florida.
Well,
just fascinating.
Pretty weird. Well, let's go to the next question from Peter in Bogota. And what were the unproduced plans for UFO Hunters, the series on the History Channel? I imagine there were
let me just answer that real quick. Okay.
Yeah.
And then get to the second half of the question. Okay.
Okay.
First of all, one of the UFO Hunters, I mean, this is going to sound really strange, but, I mean, I created the show, so UFO Hunters was not about, see if this makes sense, and you could jump on me all you want to, but UFO Hunters was not about UFOs. It was about the people who saw the UFO. The show was about the experiences that people had and were willing to talk about, not about the UFOs themselves. In American television, the underlying theme of all American television, from Life of Riley in 1948 all the way to This Is Us today, the most successful television series are about us. All we want to see on television is ourselves. We don't want to see George Washington. We don't want to see Abraham Lincoln. I mean, yeah, you'll see that on PBS with Ken Burns. But the point is, what we want to see is ourselves. These are the characters we like the most. Ourselves. So, UFO Hunters was about us. It was about the way human beings reacted and what they saw, as opposed to what was real, because unless you're standing alongside a UFO, you don't know what's real.
That's true.
That was the point of UFO Hunters. It's about the people, the experiences they have, and the results of those experiences, right? Whether you're an abductee and you're telling us the story of what you learned, whether you are Kathleen Marden, for example, from your neck of the woods up in New Hampshire, who actually described what her aunt, Betty Hill, told her the morning after she was abducted. And we have these, like, important stories. But the point is that it's the way those stories react on human beings and their responses to them. That was the whole point of UFO Hunters. Yeah. Not that, oh, gee, I saw a UFO. That's great. My plans were, in the fourth season, my plan was to interview the children of presidents. I wanted to interview Amy Carter. I wanted to interview Chelsea Clinton. I wanted to interview Jack and Susan Ford, because their father also, Jerry Ford, when he was when he was the leader in Congress, the Republican leader in Congress, what Jerry Ford did was he, after the Hillsdale, Michigan sightings, that was his district in Michigan. He was a congressman from Michigan. After those sightings, which were, it's not just, oh, look at that strange light in the sky. These were visitations. These were creatures. And then after Alan Hynek said, oh, well, this is swamp gas, Jerry Ford said BS. And what he did was he wrote a letter to Mendel Rivers on the House Armed Services Committee saying, investigate UFOs. which drew a reaction from the head of Project Blue Book, Quintilla. Furious reaction. He's just a hack politician doing a hack political move, but it wasn't, because these UFO sightings were in Jerry Ford's district, and that's why Jerry Ford, too, was investigating it. So the point here is we want to interview the children of presidents who made these comments. I mean, Hillary Clinton, for example, said after her meeting at Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch, said, "Hey, I'm going to lobby my husband, President Bill Clinton, to tell the truth about UFOs." And look what happened to all these candidates.
Yeah. Wow. I have to tell you, Bill, UFO Hunters was my favorite show. I'm not a TV watcher. I don't watch any of these reality shows, but I watched that. It was so well done and so well produced. I was so disappointed when it was off the air, and you did tell us why you felt it was taken off the air. But that being said, here is the third question. Ben, if you want to take from Peter.
Sure. I have my own copy of his questions. So Peter's final question is, could you bring us up to date on any efforts to relaunch UFO Hunters?
Well, sure. The entire series is running on Pluto TV, so you can get the entire series there. It and older Ancient Alien episodes are running on Netflix, so you can see those. So they're still on the air. One of the things that I really wanted to do with the end of UFO Hunters, this is my dream episode. Ask yourselves this question. I'm sure every person has his and her own answer, but ask yourselves this question. What would disclosure be like? What would it be like? I mean, you know from Independence Day, these things are invading us, and Will Smith steps up and says, "Welcome to planet Earth." So we know all the science fiction stuff. And we also know that one of the most important science fiction movies of the 1950s was 52? Two movies. 1956, Forbidden Planet. 1952, The Day the Earth Stood Still. They both carry the same message, believe it or not. And the message isn't about UFOs, isn't about creatures from space. It's about us. And it is what is the end of our life? Really, we are sitting today. This is why this gets to be really relevant. We're sitting today at the 6th extinction of life on planet Earth, in the midst of a pandemic that not only won't go away, but, if you want me to sound really crazy, seems to have a consciousness by looking to target various demographics every time we try to shield another demographic. And when it strikes, it isn't the flu. It didn't just make you have respiratory symptoms. It does, but it stays in your body. It's affecting your blood vessels. It's causing vasculitis. It's affecting the brain, the kidneys, the heart, muscles. What kind of virus is this? What's going on here?
Not a natural one.
Not like the flu. Not like the bird flu. Not at all. And it's killing people. But the virus isn't killing people. That's the funny part about this. It's the person's own body's reaction to the virus that's killing them. Right? Your lungs explode. You get Kawasaki syndrome, and you can't walk because you're paralyzed. What's going on here? My cat knows, but because the cat's immune. But the point is that this is strange. Viruses have been all over. If someone did this is how planets are invaded. If someone were to, Ben or Paul, draw some blood and just search for viruses, they would find hundreds, if not thousands, of viruses in your bloodstream. thousands of viruses. Well, how come you're not racked with illness? Because what's happened is that these viruses, which are a species, it's like pre-life, they're hijackers. They hijack your RNA, and that's how they spread through your body. Well, these viruses actually transform the human body to live with these viruses. They're space travelers. That's how they got here. They're space travelers. And on those two meteors, not meteors, but we call them comets, that recently passed through our solar system from outside our solar system, Oumuamua and Borisov, we now know that not only were those comets spinning in directions that they don't spin. I mean, they're flipping over on themselves, they're rotating around a center, they're spinning around like a lawn sprinkler. Well, if they're a lawn sprinkler, what are they sprinkling? Actually, what they're sprinkling is water. There is water on the surface of these comets. Water that they are depositing through the universe. What are they then? They're not comets. They look like comets. They're spaceships. They're spaceships carrying viruses. Viruses are in the water. Where there's water, there's life. And that is the whole point of these two comets. That's how we got here. Life was spread through the universe. The point is, when you talk about if you're going to invade another planet, if you want to occupy another planet, you don't do it by sending creatures down to destroy the very place you want to occupy, right? What you do is you infect the species, you transform the species, and hence that's exactly how you expand your species from planet to planet. So when you look at how new worlds, it's the same thing. It's the same thing we do. We send an exploratory expedition. Ours happened to enslave the Native Americans who lived here, but you send an exploratory expedition, and they're the ones that plant the seeds for your colonialization, for your colonization of that planet. That's why we on this planet are a colony. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was take that theory, as the last episode of UFO Hunters, when we knew we were going off the air, and make that theory the center of what I hoped would be one of these 2-hour specials about disclosure. When we finally realize not just what just happened, but that disclosure tells us who we are, what we are, how we've come here, and why that secret was so deadly.
Well,
that
Bill,
it was undercover for forever.
Well, what you've described is very akin to the highly respected theory in astrophysics of panspermia.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah, which was...
Except the spermia is in the virus.
Yeah, described by the great Sir Fred Hoyle, for example, great astrophysicist in Britain, whose book I read when I was about 10, I think, it really influenced. But the idea that maybe not necessarily spaceships, but comets and meteors carry microbes that seed life, and that the cosmic gas clouds we think are gas clouds are really clouds of life, of microbes, things of this kind. So it is a highly respected theory. So as
right.
Crazy as it might sound, it's accepted by many. So
what would be the shock if we one day found out in a disclosure moment, not just that there's ETs, we know that there's extraterrestrial life because we believe we have found the results of that life in the phosphorine in the atmosphere of Venus. We believe we found seeds of extraterrestrial life in the methane all the way back in 1976 that one of the Mars rovers found on the surface of Mars. We know there are lakes under Mars. We know that in those lakes there's a high likelihood that there would be residue of life. Let's just say that an alien culture, the alien culture is us. Let's just say that we gazillions of years ago, from our planet, somewhere out there, began sending probes throughout the universe. And this is us, by the way, sending probes throughout maybe we have 3 arms, maybe we have 4 legs, maybe we have 2 heads. They don't look like we just stepped off a subway train in the middle of Times Square, but let's just say that these are creatures that have we know the elements that are in the universe, and we know life forms on this planet are very diverse. They can have the same biological systems as we do, but at the same time, they're only vaguely related to us because we developed on different planets. It's the old Star Trek theory. If you develop on a different planet, your biology will conform to the ecology of that planet. And so there are versions of us throughout the universe, all planted by spaceships like Oumuamua and Borisov that did it recently, but this happened millions of years ago. So that's the disclosure, and that's the point of the last show that I wanted to do. When we really find out, not just that UFOs are real, we know that, but we find out the ultimate quest of human beings. Who are we? Why are we? And how did we get to this planet in the first place? That was going to be the final episode.
Wow.
Too much money, and but what really happened was, when we did the last episode of season 2, when I was up in this hotel room with one of our experts, and we were tracking the tail numbers on the Janet Airlines flights.
On McCarran Airport in Las Vegas.
Exactly, over McCarran Airport, and then tracking these same flights, some of them landing in Bullhead, Arizona for the drive to Area 51. And this is happening right on camera. Well, some folks very highly placed in the Pentagon said one of two things will happen. Either these guys are going to get put away for a long time, or the show is canceled. Your choice, Disney Studios. And that's what happened.
Wow. Bill, we're almost out of time here. So give us your website and where people can find out more, and then we'll give instructions.
Yeah. Folks can find out more about me at www.shadowlawnpress.com, where they can find UFOs in the White House. You can buy that book online. But among the other books you can buy online, talking about conspiracy theories, is this book called Unrestricted Warfare, which we picked up from a CIA translation of a war plan that came out of the Chinese People Liberation Army's plans for war on America. And their plans for war on America are like this modern version of Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is if you haven't won your war before the first arrow flies or the first shot is fired, you've lost your war. That's what Sun Tzu said. That wars are fought, won and lost before the first shots are fired. So the point is, in this book, Unrestricted Warfare, the Chinese People's Liberation Army officers explain that the way to defeat America is defeated on all levels: economically, strategically, from the perspective of health, by co-opting its leadership, by sending thousands of students to America to learn all our science secrets, then go back to China. That was their plan. And it's all in this book. So the whole strategy of how China is working to defeat us, like not telling us about plagues they get, is in that book. Now, it's not as though that I believe that COVID-19 is a Chinese plague. I don't think so. I think it's something else. I think it is a. You know how you'll get a message from Apple or from Microsoft that it's time to update your systems? your core operating system, and your computer slows down sometimes. They want you to update that system. That's what COVID-19 is.
Okay. Well, Bill, we're pretty much out of time, so we wanted to thank you for being with us, and we're going to continue off the air as part of the Western Connecticut UFO Conference at 1:15. And what you do, anybody who's listening who's not involved in the conference, go to danburylibrary.org, and if you scroll down a little bit, there's a big banner icon for the conference, and as you click on that, and you can register for the event, and you'll get the Zoom call link, and that will pretty much get you in. But Bill, we'll talk to you shortly, and we'll continue, and it'll be as well as Bill, there'll be other panelists who were speakers at the conference yesterday, including ourselves, and it's going to be a great time. So sign up if you haven't already. Very good then. So many thanks to Aurelio.
Yes, Aurelio Maraca and the crew at the Danbury Public Library for organizing the Western Connecticut UFO Conference this weekend. And many thanks to our great and prolific station manager, Dave Richards, here along with us, who helped us get this Spruce Goose off the ground. And there have been many great presentations. Participants are invited to stay for the panel discussion, as my father said, which will begin shortly, and Aurelio will explain when we get in there. And so on Tuesday, October 20th, coming up this week at 6:30 p.m., my dad and I will take on the subject of poltergeists with emphasis on our own experiences and my father's experiences during the Bridgeport poltergeist case of 1974 at a Zoom conference for the Blackstone, Massachusetts Public Library. It's free, and you can register at blackstonepubliclibrary.org. And on Saturday, October 24th, beginning at 6 p.m., my dad will offer a presentation on our own cases in Northern Rhode Island during a, quote, very creepy evening, unquote, a Zoom conference for the Museum of Work and Culture here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. And you can register at rihs.org/locations/Museum of Work Culture.com.
Okay. And we remind you to go to behindtheparanormal.com, and that's a sort of a springboard for all sorts of information on the show. And you can go there or to iTunes or any of these other podcast platforms where you'll find shows of ours back to 2008, including our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio. And Ben, what do we got for next week?
So next week, October 25th, we'll tackle Monsters of the Deep with globetrotting paranormal legend Nick Redfern.
Nick Redfern, always a tremendous guest. So we leave you today, if it's not too early, with a thought from the late great astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut, sixth man to walk on the moon, who's been a guest on our show before he passed. Quote, "I happen to be privileged enough to be in on the fact that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real," unquote. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul